In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, James and I, me and my brother James, we are going to share our thoughts on some of the top jumbo playmakers in this draft class. We're going to cover their strengths, their areas of concern, and if they are in fact primary ball handlers at the next level. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. And in this case, it could be your second listen of the day. Earlier today, I dropped a podcast where it was a one-on-one interview with Kobe Sanders, who is a player that we are going to cover in this episode. If you missed it, check it out. But if you missed it, that's why you need to subscribe to the Locked On NBA Big Board YouTube channel. Click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode, because we are coming at you at least 5 days a week. So click the bell, subscribe, leave a comment. And in this episode, like I mentioned in the opening, we're going to talk about the jumbo playmakers in the 2025 NBA draft. We're going to cover what we like about them, some concerns, and if they are in fact primary ball handlers at the NBA level. So many players enter the league with the jumbo playmaker tag or label, and then they end up settling for more of an off-the-ball role. So James and I were going to share our opinions on some of the top players. We'll start off with Egor Demin. Egor is a player that, we've talked about it at length over the last few months. Got off to just an absolutely phenomenal start to the season. He looked like a top 5 pick. The main appeal for Egor is the positional size, listed at 6'9". And we'll actually find out next week if he is indeed 6'9". But he had a phenomenal start to the year. Ran into a wall, I want to say about November, around the Thanksgiving break. And then I felt like he was able to redeem his draft stock at the end of the season. And he looked like a different player in the NCAA tournament than he did for the majority of the conference schedule. But Egor averaged 10.6 points, 3.9 rebounds, and 5.5 assists per game. Shot 41% from the floor, 27% from three, 69% from the foul line. He just finished his freshman year at BYU, and he comes from Russia, but he played a lot of his developmental ball in Real Madrid in Spain. So with all that being said, what do you like about Egor Demin? And then what are some of your concerns, James?
I think Egor is the best passer in this draft. I think he's a gifted passer, playmaker. The size absolutely helps him see the floor better, especially, if he is 6'9". But regardless of him being a jumbo playmaker, like, he has the creativity and the vision. He looks off guys in pick and roll. Looks off the roll man to hit skip passes. Like, he does all those things of a high level playmaker, again, regardless of him being 6'9". My concerns about him and whether or not I think he is a point guard at the next level are his lack of assertiveness at times, and I don't necessarily think that the handle is the tightest. Now, I know he didn't shoot the ball well for pockets of the season, but I do think eventually, if he's a league average shooter, that will help him out. But also, I don't necessarily think that him being a league average shooter will make him be a point guard. So in my mind, my thinking, the jumbo point guards that have translated from college, European ball, overseas ball, whatever, the mold is Tyrese Halliburton, who I was so wrong about Tyrese Halliburton. I thought he was going to be I question his ability to score at the level that he scores. And obviously, you see him hitting game-winning shots like crazy. But, I shouldn't have. He went to Iowa State. And then also, LaMelo Ball, 6'8", point guard, very gifted passer, still trying to figure out the whole winning basketball thing. And then you got guys like Dyson Daniels, who was, he was billed as a point guard coming out of the G League Ignite program. And he has settled into a secondary playmaker, but he's really starting to hang his hat on defense. And then you have in prior years, you look at Frank Ntilikina, who struggled to play point guard, who ended up being a 3-and-D guy when it was all said and done. So
you forgot Ben Simmons. It's
Ben
like it's
Simmons was
too. It's
always
like
a guy that could pass to me, not a point guard, because the modern point guard has to be able to score and make plays. And I'm gonna bring this back to Egor. Ben Simmons couldn't score at the level you wanted him to score, even without a jump shot. Like I get he can't shoot, and I know that's a big knock on him, but there was just times where you were just like, all right, dude, go score. Like I remember they put Aaron Baines on him at one point, and he could not score on Aaron Baines. But for Yegor's sake, I think at the next level, I don't think the scoring is ever going to be there for him to be a Tyrese Halliburton type. If we're saying he's the mold and LaMelo is second in line there. But I do think because he can pass, he can be a situational primary ball handler depending on the team around him. But I don't think he's going to be assertive enough to be your primary. And I've said in the past, I think he can be like Joe Ingles, prime Joe Ingles in Utah, where he was like, we're going to go big, let Donovan, who's 6'1", get loose. And Joe, you bring the ball up the court, you see the floor, you make all those reads and pick and roll. So that's how I feel about Egor at the next level. Again, high level passer, but the assertiveness to be a modern point guard is where I'm kind of trying to figure out what's going on with him.
Well, that's what makes his evaluation kind of tricky. I was joking with somebody, and they said that there are some teams that have too many guys that want to shoot, and they need a player like Egor who doesn't want to shoot all the time, who's not looking to get his numbers up as far as points, who will be a distributor, and who's so unselfish that he may make the players around him better. But I also feel like sometimes in order to make the players around them better, you have to be aggressive and assertive, especially as a passer. But speaking of Tyrese Halliburton, and we've talked about it before, I feel like I was 100% right and wrong about Halliburton at the same time. I was wrong in the fact that I thought he was like the ultimate complementary piece. I thought Phoenix should have taken him. I thought he's the type of guard that could play with Chris Paul. You could play with a smaller guard. You could have him, like initiate your offense in different spurts. I did not see him as like an alpha. I did not see him as an alpha in any sense of I just didn't see him as an alpha. I thought the low release was something to be concerned about. I didn't think he'd be able to get his shot off against anybody that he didn't have like a major height advantage of. And then I was just kind of turned off by the lack of rim pressure and the fact that he just didn't get to the foul line a lot. But he did shoot the ball. And so I thought because he was a good shooter at Iowa State, it kind of made him like, I don't want to say can't miss prospect, but it made him one of the safer prospects because I was like, he can play with anybody because he can shoot. And if you can shoot, you can pass and you can handle the ball, then, I mean, it's hard not to, be on the floor. He was like a 40% shooter from three. Based off of what I'm seeing out of the jumbo playmakers in this class, I don't see anyone that I feel like is the same level as Halliburton as far as being an off-the-ball shooter.
That's
why
fair
I don't know
assessment.
if anyone in this class is as safe as Halliburton. I thought Halliburton was safe, but usually safe is not a word that you usually attribute to somebody who ends up being, well, I think he's been all NBA.
He might be. He is borderline.
Yes, he was all NBA last year. He was all NBA last
But I mean,
year.
he's at this rate. If they close out Cleveland, and let's say they push whoever wins that Knicks series, and he like a finals appearance, like you got to put him in that SS superstar category, even though it may not look like your superstar point guard mode. But I mean, he just gets the job done. Like he was like not good most of the game, and in the fourth quarter, he just turns up. He's always going to get to his right hand to get a layup off, and he gets a step back three, and he can shoot. So he started off slow this season, and he picked it back up. And I don't know who said he was overrated, but he's playing well. And I think actually, again, we talked about this before, but like when you see it in the playoffs, then you look at guys, and that's why we're having this podcast today, and you're wondering, I wonder if he could be the next jumbo playmaker. So we'll see.
Yeah, I actually watched that episode called Scout on the Brooklyn Nets. Is very, very good. And their assistant GM made a comment: is a player an 82 game player or is he a 16 game player? And what he was getting at is we want a guy that is going to be good in the 16 games that is needed to win a championship and in the playoffs. All right, before we go to the second segment, I'm putting you on the hot spot. Is Egor Demin a full-time point guard, or is he? I guess nobody's really a full-time point guard unless you're undersized. But is Egor Demin a point guard in the NBA?
Yes and no. I know that's not going to answer your question, but we talked about it. Depending on where he's drafted, yes. Depending on where he's drafted, no. If that makes sense.
All right, up next, we're going to talk about Kasparas Jakucionis, by far my most difficult eval. I don't know, it's between him and Colin Murray-Boyles, but by far one of the more difficult evals for me in the 2025 NBA draft class. If you are running a business, you know that every missed call is basically money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. And if the first person did not answer, did you wait? Well, probably not. I know I usually don't. And you moved on. That is why you need Open Phone. And Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. Open Phone lets you manage your business calls and text from one single app. They have a shared inbox feature that is a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. Open Phone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. Again, that is openphone, openphone.com/lockedonnba. All right, second segment, let's talk about Kasparas Jakucionis. The strengths for Jakucionis: good positional size. Obviously, everyone in this episode has good positional size. He stuffs the stat sheet with points, rebounds, and assists. He got off to a pretty hot start this season. At one point, I had him at number 5 on my big board, and this was after seeing him live in Oregon, where he just absolutely dominated that game. And then as the season went on, he kind of struggled a little bit with the outside shooting. I feel like he just became predictable. Teams started sitting on the step back, and then the turnovers started to creep up. He averaged 3.7 turnovers per game. The concerns for me is that he just doesn't consistently turn the corner. But when he does get in the paint, he does finish. But he's crafty, uses head fakes, and he just knows how to play. But the turnovers is very concerning for me. And then how predictable he is. And then I think he's going to have some issues turning the corner in the NBA level, even though the spacing will be better, which should benefit him, but the athletes are better. So what do you like about Kasparas Jakucionis? What are your concerns? And is he a full-time point guard in the NBA?
I like obviously, again, I'm going to keep saying it. We're here for a reason. The size translates. I like that he's a good passer. I do think the shooting numbers weren't great, but I think that he's going to be a good shooter, especially off the catch. I had him at 35%. He ended the season shooting 35% on catch and shoot threes. My concerns, again, like you mentioned, the foot speed, the creativity off the dribble, and really I just think the overall handle may not be strong enough for him to be a lead guard. And, early on he was cooking. He was making those step back threes, and people were talking about him being a top 5 pick. In my mind, again, this is just me, top 5 pick. I think lead guard, franchise piece. But I didn't think that, even though while the shots were falling for him, that he had the necessary skills to be that kind of player in the NBA. I think he is a starter or a high-level backup. And again, like I had mentioned with Egor, situationally, if he's playing with some guys, like let's say Phoenix, right, where I don't need you to create a bunch of offense. I need you to steady the ship. I think he would be better there, and I think the turnovers would come down there because you're not asking him to do a lot. And again, I know in college, they're picking him up full court, but in college they usually pick you up full court for a reason. So he won't necessarily see that at the NBA level. But I think in that situation, or a Phoenix situation where we got point guard, we got guys established on the wing, he'd be good. Or let's say he somehow slides to, and I got to look at the order, but let's say he somehow slides to like Orlando, right? Where he doesn't have to do a lot of the ball handling, where he can just be big for the position, make some plays here and there, make some catch and shoot shots. I think he would be good. But like a team where like Brooklyn, I don't think that's going to help him out, because probably where they're picking at, I don't think that his skill set would be, he would get the most out of that situation, because he'd be asked to do more. And I don't think he has necessarily the necessary skills to do more. And again, as foot speed, offensive creativity, athleticism, those are my concerns. So to answer your question, is he a point guard at the next level? Yes. What's his ceiling as a point guard at the next level? That is what I have questions about.
All right, here's a question for you. You mentioned they were picking him up. And to me, there is two different forms of being picked up full court. There's the I'm picking you up full court because I'm trying to wear you down.
Yes.
And I'm trying to make you work, but I'm doing it with my backup point guard. And then there's the I'm picking you up full court because I don't think you can handle. Like, yes, you can bring the ball up court, but I think I can put a little pressure on you. Your handle's a little bit loose, and then I can turn you a few times. And then by the time I turn you, especially in the NBA, you're down to about 17, 18 seconds on the shot clock. So my question to you is, when he was being picked up full court, which category did that fall under?
I think it's more of, I don't know if you can handle. Now he had, Will Riley handled the ball some. Was Will Riley a primary playmaker? No.
Kylan Boswell handled the ball too.
Handled the ball. So it wasn't like he was the only guy. You know what I'm saying? Whereas if you look at, and again, I'm a Jeremiah Fears fan, but if a team was guarding him full court, it was to wear him down because he was the engine. But at the same time, if that doesn't work, if he gets downhill and he's got it going, you're in trouble, because he's going to draw plenty of fouls and he can find guys. The same situation for Dylan Harper. I'm not picking Dylan Harper up that far, because if he gets a running start to the basket, he's going to make 6 out of 10 attempts at the rim. That's what the statistics show. So it's like, I think Jakucionis was a guy where it's like, you know what? I don't know if the handle's that tight, or maybe his controller was vibrating a little bit with some pressure. So we're going to pick him up a little further. Now, at the next level again, you don't see that very often, but I do think he is more so a complimentary point guard than a lead point guard.
Well, up next, we're going to talk about Dink Pate. Dink Pate, depending on how you view him, you have to look at him from the lens how he played with the G League Ignite and how he played with the Mexico City Capitanes. I feel like there's two different players. So stay tuned for James and I to share our thoughts on Dink Pate. All right, last segment, Dink Pate, a guy that we were both really, really high on. And I don't want to say were as in past tense. I mean, I'm still high on him, but I feel like I have a little bit more concerns this year than I had after his initial season with the G League Ignite, when he played like pretty much the whole season as a 17-year-old. Dink Pate is 6'8". Have him on the jumbo playmakers list because that's what I initially thought he was. Going into his professional careers from Dallas, played last year with the G League Ignite, had some really good flashes, especially at the end of the season. And then this year he played for the Mexico City Capitanes in the G League. The strengths for Dink are the positional size. I think he has good vision and playmaking instincts. He's a good athlete. I feel like he's one of the few guys whose athleticism has just gotten better within the last 18 months. The concerns are the outside shooting. The concerns are also like the processing speed. Is he a 1? Is he a 2? Or is he just like a wing? I'm kind of leaning towards more that he's a wing that can be a secondary playmaker. But what are your thoughts on Dink?
So I'm a believer in Dink Pate's talent. I mentioned it before, Ralph, but if we close our eyes, I'm going to say it again. We close our eyes and we say there's a 6'8" kid that can create his own shot, that is athletic and can pass at times you'd be like, okay, top 20 pick, right? But Dink, like you said, is like he's lived 2 basketball lives in the past 2 years. Uh, they tried him as a point guard, and in this last year at the Capitanes, he was a scorer. And on top of that, like the jump shot is ebbs and flows. Like he's either making everything or he's missing everything. And I know that's like the law of averages, but like he just hasn't had he's been struggling to put together consistency shooting the ball. But I do buy his talent, and you know who my favorite role player is, Ralph. We talked about that, but like, what is Najee Marshall, right? What if Dink is like a Najee Marshall type, where Najee's just a hooper, and when the Mavs are running out there with 8 guys because everybody had hamstrings and the trade and all this other, like Najee played whatever position you needed him to play. He was playing point guard. He had a game where he grabbed like 17 rebounds or something like that. But he wasn't like, he was somebody who could play on the ball, off the ball, slash, do the dirty work. Has Dink come to that realization yet, even though he's 18? Probably not, because 18-year-olds normally don't. But could Dink, I think Dink's playmaking is better when he's aggressive and trying to get downhill than it is when he's trying to run a team. So to answer the question of this podcast, I don't think he is a point guard at the next level, but at 6'8", with his ability to make reads, again, when getting downhill, in transition, off the glass, there is value in that as a 6'8" playmaker. It's going to come down to shooting for him because of the 6 guys we're talking about, he's by far the best athlete.
I don't know. Avdalas is a pretty good athlete.
I'm going to get to Avdalas, but yes. So if he's a better athlete than Egor, he's a better athlete than Jakucionis, we can argue if he's a better athlete than Avdalas. Kobe Sanders is stronger, physically stronger, but like just run and jump, I feel like Dink is the best athlete of this group of guys.
Yeah, I think it's close between him and Avdalas. The concern with Dink is, one, the outside shooting. Only hit 24% of his threes over 2 seasons in the G League. And then this year he only shot 58% from the free throw line. That is really concerning. Yeah. And then this year, like the passing just wasn't, I mean, there were flashes here and there, but it wasn't the growth that I expected coming into this year. He averaged 3.6 assists with the Ignite, and it was down to like 1.9 assists per game this year. I felt like he was looking to show teams he can score. And also, despite the fact that he was inefficient from 3, he was letting it fly. He was letting it fly from deep. But if he ends up being Najee Marshall, that's a win. I was at pretty much all the Mavs home games when Najee had his run. I was at the game where I think he missed a triple-double by a point. And they don't call him the knife for anything. And like the unfortunate thing for Najee is, man, if he would have had this season last year when he was a free agent, he would have got more than the $27 million that he got from the Mavs last offseason. But Dink's a tough eval for me. Man, I really like him, but I just have more concerns now than I did when he was just 17. And maybe it's just a situation. Maybe the Capitanes wasn't the best fit for him, or maybe it's a situation where he was playing with Ignite and he had a lot more freedom than he would have had in any other situation. I think for him, one of the worst things that happened was for the league to shut down the Ignite, because he was supposed to have the keys to the whole Ignite offense, and they were going to showcase him. And I think if he were in that situation where they were showcasing him, even though it's been some mixed reviews, but I think that we would have seen a lot more from the playmaking standpoint.
I do want to praise him for his adaptability, though. So, people were saying the Ignite program was loser basketball because they were getting slapped a lot. And again, that was, kids playing in the grown man league. But the Capitanes, he was playing with other pros. And, it was, okay, how am I going to get on the floor? I got to work on my catch and shoot 3 again. The results were super mixed. But, like, he found ways to, adapt. So maybe that's a good sign for franchises as they look at him in the future. It's like, you know what? We asked him to do this, and then the next year we asked him to do something different. And he did both things to the best of his ability. So,
All right, let's switch to Neoklis Avdalas. I'm on record of saying I don't think there is a big talent gap between Avdalas and Ben Saraf, even Egor Demin and Kasparas Jakucionis. I mean, when we were at Basketball Without Borders in Indianapolis, All-Star Weekend 2024, Jakucionis was there, Noah Singh was there, and Nolan Troyori was there. And you can make a case to say Avdalas was just as good, if not even better than those guys. And of course, this was just one weekend in a, I don't want to call it a pickup setting, but in more so of a showcase setting, which is totally different than 5-on-5 structure. But I'm a big fan of Avdalas, 6'8". He's a good athlete, a good passer. One of the concerns I had for him coming into this year was his outside shooting, but he shot over 40% from three in Greece. So I think that's a good sign. I've had the opportunity to spend some time with him over the last week or so. I have an interview that as soon as I chop it up and edit it, I will put it out. But he's drawing some interest from colleges, which could definitely have a major impact on his decision over the next few weeks. But what do you like about Avdalas, and what are your concerns? And do you think he's a point guard at the next level?
So I think he has a good handle, and he is somebody that I would classify as a big playmaking wing. I do think he can pass, and we saw him in person last year. Like the measurables are going to be great for him as far as just like the size, and like you mentioned, the shooting did improve. He didn't shoot the ball particularly well in the under 18s. But last time I looked, he was at 40% unguarded, and you absolutely take that. But I know you mentioned I think he's a different kind of athlete than Dink, right? I think with a runway, Dink has a takeoff launching pad that Avdalas doesn't have, right? And I think the creativity off the dribble, which kind of ties into athleticism, Dink is better there. I do think Avdalas has good quickness, and I do think he is a good athlete. But, and as you can really say the same thing for Dink too, but both those guys at the rim were not good. So even in under 18s, Avdalas shot 42% on layups. And those are kids his age. And then this last season, he was at 49% on layups. So he's going to have to be somebody who's going to have to develop a floater, because I don't think he has the juice to get there all the time. And when he does get there, he just doesn't have the lift. But again, creativity, those are things you can work on. Half the time with layups is just knowing when to take a layup, when to take a floater, when to kick it out. That's for everybody, from the Dylan Harper great guys in the paint to the guys who struggle. So at the next level, I think Avdalas is a playmaking wing, not a point guard.
His comp that I shouldn't say it's his comp, but the player that he kind of models his game after is Luka Doncic. And I remember some people had questions if Luka was a primary ball handler. Not saying he's Luka, but you can tell that's a player that he mimics and he studies from the snatch back.
So let me say this about Luka. The reason why, one of the many reasons why Luka is so effective, is because his handle is so good. It has nothing to do with foot speed and athleticism. It's because two things. I can get my own shot when I want to. You can't switch anybody off me. And I can pass. And as we look at these jumbo point guards, I keep harping on, can these guys create looks for themselves consistently? And that's why I was so wrong about Tyrese Halliburton, because I would say last year, teams would be like, yo, man, make him score because he's such a good passer. But now it's because of whatever the battery he has in his bag, I don't know what his dad is telling him when they're at home in the living room, but he's beating switches, right? And he's he sees Jared Allen on him, scoring. I see Giannis on me, I'm scoring. Can these guys, again, Tyrese is a max player, borderline superstar, but can these guys take advantage of those same situations at the next level? That is why Luka is Luka. That's why Halliburton is Halliburton. LaMelo is LaMelo. And that's why Frank Ntilikina is Frank Ntilikina.
Well, Frank could never go north and south. He was always east and west.
Right.
But at that time, that's all France was producing, these bigger guards that never got into paint, that were basically big game managers that had long wingspans.
Well, real quick, I'm not saying that the reason why Frank Ntilikina, because he's not north and south. That's the difference between him and Luka. I mean, obviously there's a talent difference. But I'm just saying, like, every time we see a 6'5", 6'6" point guard, right? The ones that are successful and still play point guard beat guys off the dribble all the time. That's what I'm trying to say. Before somebody takes that clip and runs.
I think all of them should study Halliburton, because you can't say Halliburton is dominating because he has an athletic advantage. He's crafty.
I think he's a good athlete, though.
I think he's a good athlete, but that wasn't like when you did your scouting report of him. That wasn't like your pluses, like phenomenal athlete. He's just he's worked in his game. He's gotten better, and I think the people that had concerns about the low release on the shot and the lack of free throws and the lack of dribble penetration, I think those concerns were valid. But he's gotten better, and he addressed his weaknesses in every single concern once he got to the NBA. So I think he's a guy that all of these guys should study.
But you know what, though? Regardless of him having like a super shifty handle, he has great pace. So when you cut him off going left, he can get that ugly shot off and shoot the three, and he's going to make it, right? And then if he like the same move he hits Giannis with every single time, bounces back, and then he gets to his right hand, and then he scores. So it's like Tyrese's pace. And any jumbo point guard, do you have pace? Can you get to the basket? Because we know you can pass for the most part, but those two things are what separates, at least in my opinion, the kind of handle guys to the, okay, that's a full-time point guard.
All right, let's real quick talk about Kobe Sanders. Did an interview with him yesterday where he was able to describe his game and his journey to the draft. What do you like about Kobe? What are your concerns? And do you think he's a full-time point guard at the NBA level?
Obviously. So he might measure out to, well, depending on Egor, and actually there's three guys that are 6'8". But he is, again, because he's older, he's already physically, like, developed. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you know, the majority of these guys need to fill out some, still need to hit the weight room. Obviously, they're 18, 19 years old. Kobe Sanders is already strong. I think with him, it's going to come down to shooting the ball. But also, I think because he's older and he is more ready to contribute right away, I can for sure see a team placing him as just like, you know what, go be a wing and go figure it out. Make some plays here and there, but like go be a wing. And he, just talking to him the other day, seems like whatever you ask him to do, he's absolutely going to do it, because, you know, his situation, his grind to get to where he is now is that of, you know what, I got to do whatever it takes. And he mentioned in the interview, you know, if you haven't watched it, check it out. But he's like, you know what, I can show that I can do more as a playmaker. So I feel like his situation is, depending on where he goes, is going to be, you know what, go do this little stuff first, and then he'll get the opportunity to show if he can play point guard at the next level.
Only one I haven't really had a conversation or built somewhat of a relationship with is Jakucionis. But Kobe's he's older, he's more mature, he's more experienced, and he's coming from like a for real true underdog background. Yeah. And so sometimes it just kind of, you know, shapes your mentality. But I think that he's going to be one of the biggest risers. One, because of the positional size. I think a lot of teams are kind of late to the party as far as scouting him. But then another reason is when I did my big board 4.0, that, check it out, NBABigBoard.com, shameless plug. It's like the whole draft is now freshmen and seniors, freshmen and fifth-year seniors. And then there's a few guys that are testing the waters, who I believe ultimately are probably going to end up going back to school because of the money. And I think that is going to be a factor in a guy like Kobe Sanders going from, you know, maybe he's a top 60 guy on your board, a top 50, to I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up somewhere in the 30s, because I really think there's going to be about 5 or 6 or maybe even 5 to 10 guys that could pull out this draft. And it's going to be freshmen and seniors outside of a couple guys that aren't freshmen, like Colin Murray Boyles.
Rasheer Fleming's not a freshman.
Rasheer Fleming. I mean, it's only a handful of
Danny
guys.
Wolf, a couple guys, yeah.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode where James and I, we're going to have some fun with this one. We're going to talk about what we learned from the 2024 NBA Draft and how it applies to to the 2025 NBA draft class. Once again, it's Rafael and James, and we are out of here.